Well, good evening, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope podcast. And I am really excited today. I'm actually speaking with Alison Gibson from Texas. She participated in the 2024 Paris Olympics. And ironically, she made headlines for being last in place for the women's free meter springboard preliminaries, where she dove, but her feet hit the diving board, and so she dove out of form, and so actually ended up getting last place. Um, and it's funny because her and I were just talking before this that she got in all these news organizations for losing, probably getting more news coverage than any Olympian who won, which was funny. But what's cool is Allison is a believer, and she has a blog, and she actually wrote about her experience emotionally and spiritually for this journey of losing and coming to grips with that, the embarrassment, the media, and all of that. So I was, so happy that she was willing to talk with us. Allison, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm excited to share a little bit of the insight into the dark side of the Olympics.
I want to ask you first, though, why do you love to swim and to dive? Like when you do it, what do you feel like?
That is a great question. I knew how to swim before I could walk. That's what my mom says, at least. I've always loved the water. I've always been in the water. Before I started diving, I swam for about 7 years and then made my way over to the diving well. And it was kind of like magic when I touched the diving board. It was kind of like, this is what I'm meant to do. It felt right. And kind of from that moment on, I just got good really fast and just got to start competing on the international stage from a young age at Junior Pan American Games, Grand Prix, World Championships. And it was amazing. Just being able to do what I loved. I think there's something beautiful about diving in particular. It's the freedom. You're just flying through the air and your body's doing all these crazy things. And once you get, to a certain point, your brain actually slows things down a little bit. So there would be times where I'd be in the air and I felt like everything was slow motion.
Hmm.
And there's just something really cool about it flying and the freedom of that and what that feels like. And that's really why I loved it. And the adrenaline rush you get from competing and performing, there's so many really cool moments in the sport and a lot of amazing lessons learned. But yeah, I've always just loved the water and I've loved flying and I've loved flipping. And that's what diving is.
And it's never scared you or anything? Because I mean, I've got to be honest, I love swimming, but diving, I'm s- I when I was a little kid, I would walk out on the diving board and the instructor would be like, "Come on, you can do it." And I'd be like, "No." And I'd be walking back and he'd be like, "No, come on." And then I would just jump. Um, because it was
Yeah.
so scary to me, but it's not, you didn't have any moments where you're afraid.
I mean, 100%. We all have moments when we're afraid, right? Like that's life. Life is facing your fears and you have a choice in that moment. You have a choice of, am I going to have the courage to step into this scary thing and do it? Or am I going to shy away and never ever find out what could have been, what could have happened? And that's kind of what, diving taught me throughout the years is you have to
Hmm.
have a lot of courage. You have to have a lot of courage to leap off the diving board into the air, not knowing you might land flat on your back, flat on your stomach. You might get lost, right? You might hit the board. There are all these things that could happen, but there are a lot of amazing things that can happen. And I had the courage. I had the courage to push through that fear. And I had a lot of people encouraging me along the way. And because of that courage, I not only was able to do the sport, but I was able to compete on a high level across the world. And yeah, and that was so cool. And I think that lesson can be carried far beyond sports, right? The lesson of courage can carry into your relationships and can carry into work and can carry into, the choices you make, whether you want to start that company you've always wanted to start or that social media channel or that art business, right? Oftentimes we're so afraid. We're so afraid of failing. We're so afraid of, you know, a bad outcome that we don't even have the courage to take the leap. And there's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of freedom in having courage to do the scary thing. Um, and I've really enjoyed it.
Do you remember the first time when you were really proud of yourself for achieving something like a goal in swimming or diving that you did it and you were like, wow, this was kind of like over the hump for me. I feel like I can do this now.
Yeah, I think that happened when I made my first ever international meet. I was 11 years old, I think. It was the Junior Pan American Games, and ever since I had started diving when I was about 9 years old, I wanted to make an international meet. It was kind of a big goal of mine, and I knew I was good enough to do it. And so, yeah, kind of that moment when I made that first international meet, and then I got to compete on the international stage, and I got a medal, and I was a cute little like 11-year-old. I was so proud of myself. And I think that was kind of the moment where I realized, wow, maybe I can make the Olympics in this. Maybe I can be the best of the best. And yeah, it was kind of the moment that fueled me, to keep pushing and keep going. And just, yeah, made me realize what I was capable of.
So how many hours did you practice or do you practice now? Like how long are you in the water?
Yeah, I practice. Well, right now I'm taking time off. But before when I was training for the Olympics, it'd be anywhere from like 20 to 25 hours a week, sometimes more than that. I would be in the water for at least 4 hours a day. And then obviously we had the weight room and I did cardio and things like that. So it added up. It was a lot of practice. I always had something in the morning, something in the afternoon, and then work in between because you have to still make money. So, I was consistently running on like, 60-hour weeks of a combination of work and training, which is busy, but you learn how to handle it.
So how many hours did you sleep?
I'm actually really good at getting out 8 hours of sleep a night. So
Okay, wow.
my friends knew this. I was always like, when it hit 9 o'clock, I was out. Like I was like, I gotta go. So I was normally in bed at like 9:30. And then I wake up around 5 or 5:15. So that was kind of my schedule. So I sacrificed social time for sure so I could get to bed early. But I'm I like being an early riser. And so it wasn't bad. You definitely have to make sacrifices, but
What did
I
you, where do you work? Because you have an office job too, right?
mhm. I work at a company called Legend Labs here in Austin, and it's basically a strategic communications consulting firm. So we do, anything from crisis management, so helping our clients work through or prepare for a crisis, market research, so helping our clients understand, how they're doing in the market compared to their peers and what people are saying about them. And we help them build communication strategies, and then branding, which is like logo design and positioning and things like that. So I work mainly in the market research and crisis side of things. But we get all sorts of different projects, all sorts of different clients. It's a lot of fun.
Is it hard for you though, transferring? So, because, especially going to the Olympics, but also, I mean, just the swimming in general, I mean, you get all this adrenaline and it's like, I mean, it seems so important. And then you go back
Mhm.
to your office job where this is kind of what everyone does.
Yeah.
I mean, do you struggle with contentment there where it's like, man, I just want to just do the swimming and just let go of the office job? I mean, I know you mentioned money, but I wonder if
Yeah.
that's hard contentment wise.
It can be hard. I think that, you know, there are good and bad things. I think that it's good to have something outside of your sport. I think it's good to have an identity outside of your sport and something that you pour your time and energy into. That's at least personally for me, I think that's really important.
Hmm.
Because if you have your identity fully tied up in one thing, that can be dangerous. For example, if my entire identity was tied up in my sport and my result at the Olympics, I would be like depressed and suicidal right now, right?
Yeah.
Um, but because I have first and foremost my identity in Christ, and then I also have these identities outside of my sport and my work and my friends and my family, things like that. Whenever I have, a disappointment, it's stabilized. It's stabilized because I have all these other things in my life that I see are giving me value and purpose and worth. And so I think that's where having a job is actually really, really helpful. Also, coming back from the Olympics, it's like, it is really tough, right? Because the Olympics does feel important and you pour your heart and your soul into it. And then you come back and it's like, nobody cares. Like, nobody cares. Like, people are like, oh, congratulations, great job. But like, you still have client work to do. Like, your client
Yeah.
still expects like that report on Monday, right? And so I think like it's good to like be able to come down from the Olympics and have like something to do, something to fill my time with, something to like put my mind into. But yeah, I mean, there definitely are like weird mental challenges. I think there's a combination of a lot of things. There's pride, there's ego, there's all this stuff. If you're working really, really hard for a goal and then you like hit that, and it's like now you have the question of what's next. And so there's a lot of stuff that you struggle with that a lot of people won't understand, right? My coworkers will never understand.
Yeah.
My friends, my family will never understand some of these things that I have to like mentally process through. And I'm lucky my family does a really good job like trying to understand and trying to be there for me. And I'm really thankful for that. But yeah, there definitely are a lot of like mental and psychological challenges that you have to walk through coming down from the Olympics. But again, I will say I think having something outside of my sport does help with kind of managing and stabilizing some of those things.
Was it hard going back to work though after the Olympics, not just because of going back to kind of the mundane every day, but also because of how the Olympics went? Did you feel embarrassed going back to work because you knew everyone had seen all these headlines?
I think um it can be hard. Like, it can be hard because when people look at you, they look at you and they are like sad for you. They look at you
Yeah.
like you're kind of this like something's broken. Um, and I think that like that can be tough to face because it's like I'm fine. Like, I'm fine. I had a bad day. I'm not defined by this. And yeah, sometimes that's hard. Um, I'm trying to think of where I was going with this, but I don't necessarily feel like embarrassed going back to work because a lot of them, even my clients, have watched my journey, right? So a lot of them watched
Oh,
me compete at
awesome.
Olympic trials, right? They watched kind of the whole process and they followed me from, hey, I'm training for the Olympics because I was for a while I worked and I wasn't training. So I said, when I came out of retirement and said I was training, they've been able to follow the whole journey and watch me win nationals and watch me compete internationally and watch me, compete at Olympic trials and literally watched me on TV making that Olympic team. And so all of them know like what I'm capable of, right? All of them have seen it.
Yeah.
So all know that what happened at the Olympics was this kind of shocking, jarring moment of like, wow, like that is crazy. That's out of the ordinary. And so I
Yeah.
think that it's not like, you know, like they know what I'm capable of. And I think also because it was so shocking, it wasn't necessarily like, wow, I just competed terribly. It was like I just had this moment, like this
Yeah.
unforeseeable, like nightmarish moment that like, what can you do?
Yeah.
Um, I feel like if I would have gone to the Olympics and that moment would have happened and I would have scratched the event and didn't finish competing, or like everyone thought I would, after that happened, or if I would have gone and just like fallen on my face on every dive, like that would have been embarrassing. But I think because of the perseverance that I showed and the courage that I showed, because of the way I carried myself, because of the story that I told, I'm able to walk around with my chin held high and with not with pride, but with I'm not embarrassed because I'm
Right.
proud of how I handled one of the most difficult times of my life on national television. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Did you know as soon as you dove off that something was gonna go wrong or
no. That was a crazy thing because I talked to my coach about this and I was like, hey, what happened? Like we looked at the video and both of us were like, that wasn't a dangerous takeoff. Like I wasn't too close. Like my head wasn't close to the board. Like it was actually
Yeah.
a really good takeoff. I got really high off the board and it was bad luck. It was like I got the perfect height and spun at the perfect speed for my feet to come around the board at the worst possible time. If my feet would have come around a little earlier, or if I would have jumped a little lower, it wouldn't have been a problem. It was quite literally like the worst combination of factors happened at one time. And it's never happened to me before in my life. I have been diving for 15 years. And that has never happened to me before in my life. When I was in the air, I thought, wow, this is a great takeoff. It felt so good. Like it's not, everyone was in shock. Like when it happened, everyone was in shock. Like what just happened? And
And you
and that makes
probably
it even,
didn't feel anything till you hit it, right? I'm
yeah, like I
guessing.
hit the board and I was like I just remember being like in shock. Like I was just like I hit the water and I was like, I didn't even know. Like I didn't even know it had happened. And so that was kind of a crazy moment of, it like there are situations where people have a dangerous hurdle or things are going on where it's like, wow, like that was actually like they really messed up really bad. In this situation, it was just truly like just the terrible luck. And I really don't know if there's much else I could have done, in that moment. Like it was bad luck.
Yeah. Did you, when you hit the water and you're under and you're about to come up, I mean, and you hit it, and so there's kind of like this something went wrong. I mean, what were you thinking? Were you worried? Did you want to stay underwater for a while? Just- But let a few other people go and then I'll come up.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. You can't hide,
Right. Yeah.
right? You can't like you have to get up and you have to face the crowd and you have to face the cameras and you have to face the judges and your coaches and the media and there's nowhere to hide, right? You can't breathe underwater. If I could have gone and crawled into a hole in that moment and hidden, I would have, but that was the thing. I still had four more dives to do. Everybody thought I was going to scratch. Everyone thought I would have given up because every single athlete I talked to who said they would have, if they basically, I talked to a bunch of athletes after I finished competing and coaches, and everyone said, hey, if I was in that position, I would have scratched. Like I was in pain. Both my heels were bruised very badly. The sides of my feet were bleeding. And there was pretty much no chance of me making the semifinal at that point.
Hmm.
And um and everyone was like just expecting me to scratch because like why would I continue? And I think in that moment I did have the choice, right? I did have the choice to go cry in a hole somewhere, right? And hide. And
Yeah.
I didn't do that because I saw that, I knew that there were like little divers back home watching. And I knew that, I had an opportunity to fight and keep fighting and show what it looks like to keep your chin up, even though everything was going wrong. And so it was hard. It was one of the hardest hours of my life. Like it was terrible. I mean, I don't think anyone really understands the gravity of having to could still compete for an additional hour and like 20 minutes after something like that happens. But again, because I did that, then the next day the headlines weren't, oh, American diver like gives up. It was like American diver shows resilience. American diver like kept fighting, right? Like, you know, my DMs were from parents saying, hey, like it was really inspiring to see
Hmm.
the courage you showed and to hear your testimony on TV.
Yeah.
And so that decision to have courage and keep going was ended up being like a really, really powerful decision. And something that I could be really proud of and that a lot of people around me were really proud of.
Well, I was gonna ask as you were continuing to do the dives, because like you said, I mean, that's huge, taking that you know, almost a chance too, because you're probably, I mean, there's always the potential in a really random way that could happen again, right? But you're like, I'm gonna
Hmm.
keep doing this. Um, like, did you cry while you were swimming? Because I mean, no, I guess no one can really tell if you're crying if it's water.
Yeah, definitely. I was like, don't cry. I was telling myself not to cry, but I was in between dives and I was like, I was in so much pain. Like I was in pain, like emotionally, physically, like every kind of pain you can ever imagine. And I was like so angry at God. Like I was like, God, why? Like, why would you tell me to come out of retirement and pursue this sport with less than it? Basically, I came out of retirement with less than a year to make the Olympics,
Hmm.
which was insane, right? There are people who hire private coaches who quit their jobs, all this stuff to train for the Olympics. And here I was, and I was like, I'm just going to come out of retirement and like maybe make the Olympics in less than a year. We'll see what happens. And God said, He called me into that. And then He provided. He provided for me financially, He provided friends and basically everything that I could need.
Yeah.
I went to nationals and I won. I went to world championships, qualified the Olympic quota spot. I went to American Cup and won. I went to the French Open and medaled. I went to Olympic trials and I qualified for the Olympic team. It was like the whole thing is like success, 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 success. Everything was like laid out perfectly. Right. And then all of a sudden, my very first dive in the Olympics, this thing that has never happened to me before in my life happens.
Yeah.
And it basically means that my dream of medaling is gone. Everybody's watching. And I was like, God, this is mean. Like, I was like, God, this is cruel.
Hmm. Yeah.
If you're a good God, why? Like, why would you let this happen? This is terrible. Like, why would you call me into this? Like that, like, I couldn't understand. In the moment, I was like gutted. I was like, again, why would God call me in to do all these things, lay the groundwork, allow me to make the Olympics, and then just be like, okay, cool. Your worst nightmare at the worst possible time is going to happen.
Hmm.
Like, how do you process that as a human? How do you process that?
Yeah.
And then it was crazy because the event ended, and I go over, and you have to go through a line of media before you leave. And I go over to the line of media, and they're like, "Oh, you've been randomly selected for a drug test." And I was like, not only did I just have the most gutting competition of my life, but now I have to be followed around by a drug testing lady and get drug tested, which takes a lot of time. And I'm like, that means it's going to be even longer before I can like get out and hug my mom. Right. So like I wanted to get out and hug my friends and my family. I couldn't because now I had to get drug tested.
Yeah.
And then before I could even get drug tested, I had to walk through a line of media. And then I had to answer to them. Right. So I was stopped and I said, what happened? And I had to keep my composure and I had to be able to answer their questions, and I had to answer their questions in a way that I was thinking, how can I glorify God through this? Like, how can I say something good through this?
Hmm.
And I'm
Yeah.
standing there crying, like trying so hard to keep myself together as I'm answering these media questions. And I get out and I have to get the drug test. And then after getting drug tested, I had to make the walk down the pathway to my family, which was what felt like a mile. And it was just me by myself with my backpack. My feet were bruised and hurting. I was limping, carrying my backpack, carrying my towel, all by myself, just walking down this dusty dirt road, just limping, like slowly limping, like trying my hardest just to get to my family. And this was probably about an hour and a half after I finished competing. There was no one else at the pool. And I remember I was halfway there, I start crying. I just broke down. I just broke down. I was like, I can't make it. Like, I can't do this. I cannot carry this. It felt impossible. And it was funny because a few workers came over to me and they were like, are you okay? And I was like, I'm fine. And I picked my bag back up and I just kept walking and I kept walking. And I finally made it out and was able to hug my family. And it was it was one of the most difficult things I've ever experienced, where it was just like not only was the competition hard, but I felt like I was just targeted. I felt like the devil was like coming at me in every possible way.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, where are your angels now? And I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand it. And it wasn't until, I don't know if I'll ever fully understand it, but it wasn't until a couple of days after when the dust has settled. And I started seeing the response from the media and the response from people and all the kind words, and all the amazing things being said. And I started realizing that even in the darkest moment of my life, the most painful moment of my life, God could still be glorified and could still be used for good. And that just, it gave me so much encouragement. And it just helped me realize if I look past my own pride, right? If I look past my ego and I look towards my purpose here on earth, which is to glorify God and be used as a vessel to spread his word, if I look there,
Yeah.
then I'm able to see, wow, like I was able to reach so many people that I maybe would have never been able to reach if this wouldn't have happened. And it's terrible that this is the way that I had to reach people, or this is what happened for me to reach people. But I also recognize that there's a lot of beauty and power in that, and a lot of beauty and power in this story, because not everyone can relate to winning, but every single person can relate to heartbreak,
Oh yeah.
failure, and to mistakes. And I hope that my story can encourage people to just get back up. Just get back up. Keep fighting, keep pushing, and even when your feet are bleeding and your heels are bruised and your heart's broken and you're crying and all you want to do is give up and all you want to do is escape, like just keep taking one step at a time, and you'll get out. You'll get out and you'll get stronger and you'll get better through it.
Well, I wanted, earlier you were saying you're angry at God, which I think very few believers are willing to admit. I'm sure more people, you know, more Christians do get angry at God, but I think very few people admit that, because there's something wrong with that statement.
Yeah.
Um, I want to ask you, personally in your journey with the Lord, do you feel like getting angry at God is sinful?
I I personally don't think, I think we're human. Like I think we're meant to grapple with God. I think we're meant to grapple with things. I mean, you see this in the Bible over and over again, right? Like
Yeah.
you see this with like King David, and you see this with Abraham. Like you see this all throughout the Bible of grappling with God, right? And grappling with our human nature and asking why. Like why now, or why not me, or why did this happen, or whatever it might be, right? And I think that's actually a really important part of our faith journey. If you don't have the courage to ask God why, if you don't have the courage to admit that you're angry and work through that anger, then it's going to stunt that relationship. I mean, a great example, I look at my relationship with God similarly to how I look at my relationship with another human, right? Say, something happens and you have all these feelings towards your significant other, but you just don't talk about it. You just don't admit that you're angry and you're just holding all that emotion in, then what's that going to do to your relationship?
Yeah.
Right? That's
Yeah.
going to it's going to have a negative impact on your relationship because you're not facing these questions and these issues, and you're not bringing them forward and bringing them to the light. And so I think that's another thing too, is we're not meant to be perfect. We're not perfect, right? I think sometimes in the Christian community, it's like, oh, you have to put a perfect face on and always be saying the right things and doing the right things. And it's like, no, we're imperfect humans living in an imperfect world. And we need to get better, to strengthen our faith, to strengthen our relationships, to be good examples. We have to shine light on these questions and on these dark places, because only then, if we shine light on the darkness, will we be able to overcome that darkness, will we be able to overcome those fears, Will we be able to overcome those questions? Because if I wouldn't have sat there and said I'm angry, and if I wouldn't have sat there and asked God why, if I would have never asked the question, then I would have never been able to see the answer,
Yeah.
right? I think that's what we have to do is we have to have the courage to ask the question and the hard question and maybe the questions we're not supposed to ask. Because if we ask those questions, then it opens our eyes to be able to say, okay, God, now show me. Now show me why you did this. Now show me the silver lining. Now show me what you can do through this.
Yeah.
And so I personally think that it's actually very, very important to bring these things up and to address these things. Because if you don't, you're just going to be holding on to them, and that's not healthy.
No, yeah, I agree with you. And I, it was interesting too, because you even told me a little bit earlier, you said, you're still not quite sure the whole reason why this happened. You can see the parents texting you, you can see the media saying she persevered, and people looking at that being like, wow, that's such an example. And obviously, that's a very tangible, like, wow, that's a good thing that came out of this. But also, I mean, you personally lost something, you personally grieved it. And so while it's a blessing to many others, to you, you're like, this is still really painful. And this is always going to be on my record. And I'm always going to remember this.
Yeah.
Um, and you said, even though I don't get it all now, I still don't, you still were able to express that to the Lord and go, you know what? I'm trusting you, which is what faith, courage to have faith is, right? Is that I'm still going to trust you even though I don't understand. But God even rewarded you in that because here you are getting to tell your story without all this bitterness and resentment because you haven't been able to say, you're angry. You've talked to God, you still talk to him. And so you're able to articulate that. I think that in of itself is a huge gift because you shared that emotion with God.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Like and this is another thing. I want this, and maybe this is why God let this happen to me, because now this can be used as a learning experience or a point of motivation for other people, whether they're believers or non-believers, athletes or non-athletes. This story, though it's painful for me and painful for me to recount, it's an incredible proof point and opportunity to show, hey, like this is a very visible, example of an incredibly dark moment. And even here, God can work good things, right? So many people are going through these things and they're not as visible or they're hidden. But I hope that in a way this can be an example for people to look and go, okay, like if she could do that, like I can get back up and I can find God's goodness in this, or I can keep persevering, or my life has worth or value beyond this one moment. And
Yeah.
that's truly what I hope, and that's what gives me the courage to share this. I don't want to from a prideful and ego standpoint, it's hard for me to talk about this. Like it is hard for me to share this, but whenever I have an opportunity to share it, what gives me strength is recognizing that it can do good.
Yeah.
And this isn't my story, but this is God's story, and this is God's voice working through me. And I can't let my ego and my pride get in the way of something that could have power and purpose. And so I have to remind myself of that.
Yeah. Well, you also made a point of really saying you really want young people, young divers, but I mean, I think just young people in general to see this and be encouraged. Why do you think it's so important that young people be encouraged to have courage? Because that's a very interesting thing that you seem to have a passion for. Even on your blog, you're saying, you're wanting to speak and speak in events about this experience, and you want young people to listen to you so that they can be encouraged. Why do you think young people need courage right now? Why is that something that you have a passion for?
I think young people have always needed courage. I don't think that it's like a right now thing. I don't think that it's like a generational thing. I think that it's it's something as as you're developing, as you're growing into who you are, I guess. Your high school and your middle school years are really difficult, and you're faced with a lot of a lot of struggles, whether it's what people think about you or your grades or getting into that college or winning state, whatever. There's all these pressures and there's all these things that can hold you back, or you might conform to things you don't want to conform to because you feel like that's what you're supposed to do and all stuff. And so I think kind of the narrative I'm trying to tell is reminding people of, first of all, where their identity lies. And so your identity is not in your grades. Your identity is not in your placement in a competition. Your identity isn't in, you know, these awards, whatever it might be, right? Your identity is grounded in something so much deeper and something so much more stable, which is your identity in Christ and your faith. That's unmovable, unshakable, can never be taken away, right? So if you can ground your identity in something unshakable, then it makes everything else a little bit less dramatic. So first and foremost, identity is really important. And I think we all struggle with identity, especially as we grow and develop, trying to figure out who we are. So that's
Yeah.
one thing that's important for me to kind of share with these athletes. And the next thing really is courage. And courage isn't just for young people, courage is for everybody, right? I've met so many people who want to do things in life and they don't do them because they don't have the courage to go and do the scary thing, whether it's asking somebody on a date or trying a new sport or bungee jumping, right? Like it doesn't have to be like this life-changing thing. It's just courage to do something. And so, I really want to inspire people to push past that fear, push past that discomfort. It's okay to be a little bit different. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to fail. It's okay, to be bad at something for a little bit, right? Because to be great, you have to be bad. And so I don't know. I think for me, it really is about inspiring people to look in the mirror and ask themselves, who do I want to be? Why does it matter? And then how am I going to do this tangibly? And how am I going to actually take those steps with courage to achieve the life that I want to achieve and not be afraid of it?
Well, I mean, it's an encouragement for me to listen to you. Because as you said, so many people have areas of their life where they need courage because there's so many elements of life that intrude on your comfortability. Um, but I want to ask you one last question. Because I hear, the resilience and the strength in your voice, which is such an encouragement. Um, but in the times, even now, when you wake up and you think about this, or you think about anything, and you feel that, courage wavering, um, what for you do you find encouragement that you're like, okay, I'm not feeling it today, but this is what I look to, or this is where I go, this is what I read, this is what I sing, whatever it is, to remind you of the truths that you're talking about right now.
Well, I think there's a combination of things. First and foremost, obviously, trying to be in the word daily, trying to surround myself with the truth of God's word and what he says about me. Oftentimes we're faced with lies and our mind likes to think certain things. And so when those
Mm.
lies, when those thoughts come into my mind, I say no, I stop them and I replace it with a Bible verse. So the world says I'm a failure. The world says I'm not good enough. The world says I'm not pretty enough. I say, no, like I'm beautifully and wonderfully made. God has plans for me, right? I try to replace the lies of the devil with the truth of God and my purpose and my creation. So that's kind of the first thing, and that's why being in the Word is so important. Secondly, surrounding myself with a community that knows me, loves me, and can speak truth into me. Right. So
Yeah.
we can only do so much on our own. um, God calls us to have community for a reason. And so I think that's why church and Bible studies and just good Christian community is really good for me, because I have people that I can go to and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this right now. Or, hey, like this week is really hard. And they can say, hey, this is the truth. Like
Hmm.
they can speak encouraging words into me. They can call me out of those dark places or those dark thoughts and just call me into the light and call me into the truth.
Hmm.
And I think also just doing something fun, laughing. I think, sometimes when we're in a dark place or in a dark mood, we try to hide in that darkness and stay in that darkness and listen to sad music and all of that stuff. And that will just make you spiral deeper and deeper into that hole. And so something I try to do is figure out, okay, how can I get out into the sunlight? How can I laugh? How can I spend time, doing something that I love, reminding myself this is a beautiful life that I live and this is a beautiful opportunity. And then this is the one thing I tell every single person to do that's struggling with just life in general is every day when you wake up or before you go to bed, say 5 things that you're thankful for. Just that's all it has to be. Five things you're thankful for, and then pick a few people to pray for. And what that does is that makes you step outside of yourself and your selfish feelings and your selfish thoughts. And it helps you realize first, you're blessed, right? I'm blessed to have food on my table, roof over my head, a warm blanket, a job, a car, right? Those are super easy things. I'm blessed to have those things. Some people in this world don't even have that, right? And then if you're praying for other people, you're recognizing, wow, there are other people that are going through hard things. It's not just me. I'm not the main character. I'm not like living this super dramatically terrible life. Like there are who
Yeah.
are in the hospital, right? There are people whose loved ones have cancer. There are people who, don't have a job and can't pay their bills, right? And if you step out of yourself and if you think, I'm thankful for this, and then I can pray for these other people, and I recognize I'm not the only one going through something hard, I think that really helps you ground yourself and recognize that these things that you think are the end of the world right now really aren't. Um,
Hmm.
and so those are kind of a few things that I do to help stabilize my emotions and remind me of my worth.
You know, Allison, I'm just hearing you. You should start a podcast or write a book or a devotional or something. You're you first of all speak well, very you're like to the point, um, in love, but at the same time, I'm like, she's gotta do something. Gotta write a devotional or
I've
I don't
had
know,
so
do a
many people.
podcast.
I've had so many people tell me I need to write a book or something. I've thought about doing a podcast. I haven't committed to it. That's where I need to take my own advice and have courage. I need a little more energy in my life. I'm not there yet, but that
Yeah.
is something that would be really cool to do. And I've learned a lot, and I need to write a lot of these things down because they are things that I would love to share. And that's part of the reason why I want to speak, and speak to businesses and high schools and club teams, right? Because a lot of this stuff, it's not necessarily groundbreaking, but it's all these things have really helped me. And I love being able to share that with people and hopefully help them as well. And I've learned all of these things because I've lived a life that hasn't always been easy. So through that, I've learned a lot of lessons to be able to manage these really hard moments.
Yeah, and just I mean, like you said, it's crucial reminders. I mean, it's simple, but it's so hard, and so you need to hear it all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
Well, Allison, I mean, thank you so much. I've been blessed, and again for listening audience, this is Alison Gibson, and I'm gonna put a link to her blog so you guys can read her own words shortly after the Olympics. But also, she's got a lot of stuff on there about different topics and life stuff, and I think it would be encouraging to you. But Allison, thank you so much.
Thank you.